Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to Victoria 3. I'm Lord Forward, and today we will be going over the Hudson Bay Company. So this is going to be a guide for this country, and then I am going to do a Let's Play about this, and it is going to be a tutorial Let's Play. So this video will be the guide, and I'll make another video series with a tutorial through it. So look forward to that. So let's look at Hudson Bay Company as a country. So Hudson Bay Company is one of the precursors to modern Canada. There are several Canada nations here. You've got the Columbia District, us as the Hudson Bay, Lower Canada, Upper Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. The goal as the Hudson Bay Company, in fact all the Canada nations, is to basically confederate and form Canada itself. Now, annoyingly, Great Britain also owns a province up here. You've got Newfoundland and Labrador. And in fact, for those of you who enjoy your history, you might know that they did not join Canada till 1949. For a long time, they were actually a dominion of the Crown. And in fact, they were semi-autonomous, and then they went bankrupt in the Great Depression and basically voted the government out of existence to rejoin Great Britain as almost a colony. So you can't get them under your lands, your control very easily. However, for all the Canada nations, you have this Confederate Canada type mission. And how you do that is you have to first research nationalism, which should be the first research you do as Hudson Bay anyway. Once you do that, as long as you have good relations with Great Britain, so first off, go over and improve relations with them, and you're economically superior, as in your GDP is larger than theirs, which at the start, Lower Canada is ahead of you, and they will all grow to a reasonable size. You're the largest, though, so given time, you will outpace all of them. You will then have an option to confederate Canada up here, and it will tell you what the details are. You have to have amicable relations at a greater GDP than a neighboring Anglo-Canadian or Franco-Canadian country with the same overlord, which is going to be Great Britain. And you have to have better than 50 relations, and you cannot have Canadian unifier. Once you, in fact, colonize or you confederate, you get this for 2 years, meaning you can only confederate all of them after about 10 years or so, which takes a while to do. So, what are the strengths of Hudson Bay Company that will allow us to do it? Well, first off, Hudson Bay Company has access to a great amount of states. The downside here is the population in each state kind of sucks. Outside of your starting area and Quebec and Ontario, the rest of your lands are basically uninhabited. I'd say there's like one person for every 100 square miles at this rate. Or kilometers if you don't use miles. And it's a problem. This is probably one of the few countries where you don't want to necessarily go nuts building tall because you won't have the population to support it. So the first stuff is, and this is a complaint I have, the Hudson Bay Company supposedly is all about the fur trade. Well, unfortunately, there are no fur trade buildings in the game. I hope they introduce it. If they do a DLC, fur trade would be one of the things I would say add, considering the description of this country talks about the fur trade. Anyhow, the strengths of this are you have access to the region up here, which is the Canadian Prairie in some of your provinces, or this province basically. These other ones have the Rocky Mountains. In fact, there's a lot of modifiers to these areas, including Niagara Falls if you want electricity. This means agricultural buildings are actually supremely good in this area, which is quite nice considering your lack of population. So what you want to do is you want to start building up your agriculture areas in these two provinces by and large. The rest of them, you want to make sure that you get access to iron, coal, sulfur, lead mines. You want to get all of those at level 1. The big focus is iron and coal, and to somewhere in your lands, probably over here in either Ontario or Hudson Bay, Quebec, build a tooling workshop so you can generate some tools. Of course, you're part of the greater British market, so it's not the biggest issue because you can just buy the tools off the market for a reasonable price, but it's kind of nice to get an industry started. Then you just have to confederate Canada at the end, and this is something not a lot of people know. Under cultures, there is a nation formation page, which is, as you look at it, it's kind of strange to look at it because it shows all the cultures of the world, which is kind of cool because there's no other easy way to look at this. There's an option here to form Canada. Basically, it tells you how many you have to control. 3 of 11. You have to have 8 to get them all. Getting 8 is, I won't say impossible, but somewhat tricky. The most annoying thing about this is while you start colonizing this area, the United States very rapidly starts colonizing this Blackfoot, Montana, and up here, and will probably colonize all of this before you make any dent into the Iron Confederacy. Meaning at some point, if you want the nice, lovely Canada-US borders, you have to declare war on the United States of America. And it's actually possible to win it. It can be quite difficult. On the other hand, you can just get all these provinces you need to form Canada, basically from Confederation. And if you want to or need to, you can, in fact, declare war on the US. And I would recommend trying to get, like, their Saskatchewan lands up here rather than pushing for too much. You might find that you can persuade Great Britain or Mexico to help you. But honestly, I would wait until the United States either plunges into a civil war or some other various revolt where half or more of their lands desert them. And then if you declare war and take those lands, they tend to be more willing to give them up. You're not going to be able to win a full-on war, so your best bet is to strike while they're weak, as well as have immensely superior military technology when you go in. Once you get Canada, most of your industry is going to be focused over here in Upper or Lower Canada, mainly from the sheer fact that this is where your largest population centers are. It can be very worth early on if you've got the spare authority, which you don't actually have that much because at the start you're consumption taxing on grain, throwing down some either promote national values to try and assimilate the Native Americans to your culture, or greener grass campaign to try and promote some migration attraction. Be aware, though, that your land up here is not particularly great. This rapidly drops from high to low until you start building an industry, at which point more people will come. It can be quite difficult to pull off, but you can grow the population of Canada to several million in like 20 or 30 years. In terms of growing your population, it also can be worth trying to get a health system going, which can take a little while to do because you have to research pharmaceuticals first. But anything that gives you access to the health system institution will allow your population to die less, thereby growing your population, and you're definitely a country that needs population growth. I should also point out the fact that a lot of people will try and compete with the US to some degree with colonizing, doing pharmaceuticals, and then into quinine to get more max colonial affairs. You can do that, and it will speed up your colonization of this area a bit. But no matter how much I invested in my colonial areas, the United States was, in fact, still superior at colonizing this area. Technically, one thing you could do is you could pause or you wouldn't want to cancel because it would remove your lands, but you could try somehow to get more growth going in there. But for the growth, you really need the population, and you just can't compete. So the reality is getting that technology and expanding your colonial affairs institution isn't worth really doing. It's much better to build production and other stuff and then have to fight the US later. Now, there's also this map, the American Western Frontier. If the US does it a couple times, they can theoretically clarify your border here with you and take away Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I've not seen the AI do it after a couple games of these people, but a player can definitely do it. If it does happen, it would not be worth you giving up these lands if you can help it, because they're decent provinces. They gain access to good resources. There's migration. all told, you want as much land as you can as the Hudson Bay into Canada country. And then at some point, technically, you'll still border Mexico, so you could invade them or work on the United States. You can do diplomatic plays on your own, which is quite nice, including like pushing from independence from Great Britain. But I wouldn't do that until your economy easily matches Great Britain's, which given time, a long time, you can start to approach their levels. Oh, at some point, you'll also get this journal entry, the Canadian Pacific Highway, build a railroad across Canada. It's basically just this, all the way to Quebec from Colombia. It's a nice little bonus and stuff. It's quite cool. You don't have a lot of other decisions. Just make sure you actually do remember to go into the culture and form Canada. It will not tell you to go do it. Even though you might have confederated all of them, you still have to click that button. In terms of developing Canada, and this is a question I'm sure I will be asked, you want to, at the start, you don't have access to any construction sectors. Even though it's going to kill your economy, it's probably worth throwing down at least one construction sector, probably in either Quebec or Ontario, because they have more population to spare than your capital area, Manitoba, Fort Douglas here. Once you get that going, it's worth starting to throw down at least the agricultural buildings in these two provinces, followed by the mines and everything else elsewhere. You're going to rapidly run out of peasants and unemployed population. That's just the reality, which means these areas, Quebec and Ontario, which have slightly more population and tend to grow faster, are going to be two of your population and economic really juggernauts. Manitoba, basically these three eastern ones are where you're going to make your money. You want to make sure that you grow rapidly enough that you can very quickly start confederating them. When I did it the first time, I got, I think, Lower Canada, which just was my major economic rival because they start with a higher GDP than you. Once I got this, it was over. As soon as you get one confederation, you'll just balloon to the size that every 10 years or so, or you just, I think it's every 5 actually, you just unify another part of Canada, deform Canada. It's not very hard. Great Britain will defend you if you're attacked. It might help you if you attack the US. In fact, in one of my games, Great Britain declared war on the US to try and get rid of slavery, which was a very interesting experience. They lost, as did I almost lost when I invaded the United States, but hilariously, and I don't know if it will apply to your game, the US doesn't want any of your Canadian lands, meaning that all they wanted from me was like war reparations. So even if I lost, I would have just lost war reparations. Just keep an eye on that, and remember that if you start a diplomatic play and then you back down, which you might have to do, they will take the primary war goal they're enforcing on you. So don't just recklessly start a diplomatic play against them, because they might demand something like Quebec. And yes, you could fight the war and lose and give them Quebec, or you could back down and just give them Quebec anyway. So it's up to you. Just be very careful about it. And overall, have fun. I wouldn't say the Hudson Bay Company is the best nation for beginners. I'm going to do it in a tutorial, but it's a pretty decent nation. You don't really have any threats. Downside is you don't really have any population either. And anyway, I believe that will be it for the Hudson Bay Company. There's not a lot of anything super special about them. They're definitely a nation I can see additional content being added to as the game goes forward. It would be really nice if there was a way to get Newfoundland up here. But that's just unfortunately how it goes. But if you could get this nice Grand Bakes fishery, which honestly would be rather nice. But in the meantime, you'll have to survive as a subject of Great Britain, with the potential to, out of all the British states outside of the East India Company, you're the most likely to grow strong enough to break free from Great Britain during the game's time frame. So have fun, form Canada, and go around saying sorry to everybody. Bye for now.